So thank you for coming today. I know I have some students that may have to go, and also thank you, Tanya, for making this a still well, healthy, well, still. Okay, that's good. All right. This is our, I think, fourth year? We've been doing this now? 4 years that I've brought a panel of transgender folks into our campus, and it's all about trying to build the bridges to better care. I appreciate that you came today. We are going to videotape it. I didn't give my permission for videotaping. I need a paper bag over my head. But Mitch, you make sure you, our panel here can get it. Okay, good. I want to introduce two folks today. We have, and then I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. But I'm going to introduce just two of the panelists. Dr. Carolyn Fuller is here, and she's a licensed naturopath physician, and she's thrilled to be back in Phoenix because she's been in Washington.
Yes.
It's sunny here.
Yes.
Yeah.
See the puddle behind me?
Yes, yes. And she's a primary care provider in Washington State for the last 8 years. As a doctor and teacher, Dr. Fuller seeks to empower and educate her patients on their path to optimum health. Dr. Fuller is a family practice doctor with a subspecialty in transgender health. She's worked with the trans community professionally and through volunteer work for almost a decade. She's helped hundreds of patients medically transition. She's often called upon for her experience and perspective and has spoken to many audiences regarding transgender health. She's dedicated to living and helping others live an authentic, empowered, healthy life. And thank you very much for being here today. I will have all the contact information of our panel members available for everybody, and then afterwards too, if you're around, you can come up. Everybody has cards and very willing to share all the information. So Dr. Fuller, this is her first panel with us this year, so welcome. Shelley, and it's Ruby.
Good.
Shelley actually has been with us before, and Shelley is an outpatient counselor with crisis preparation and recovery in the Scottsdale area. And after 7 years of marriage, Shelley's husband disclosed that he was a woman. So as a result, Shelley began her own transition journey that included researching and learning about transgenderism while experiencing her own grieving process and loss. The grieving process allowed her to redefine her relationship and move forward in her own life journey, both as an individual and a spouse of a transgender person. Transition for Shelley also included returning to school and becoming a mental health counselor, advocating for transgender families and educating the workplace and community on transgender issues from a systems perspective. Shelley and her spouse have both transitioned successfully and remain happily married 8 years later. Now, in my little, wow, that's great. Yeah, so, I have a correction to make, however. I think in my email I said Randy was a police officer, and possibly that's why you're all sitting in the back. Great. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. Actually, Randy actually works for American Express, for which I have thousands of dollars. Actually works for American Express and has a very good, I think, story about healthcare policies at American Express and how she actually helped transform that. So with that, what I'm going to do is start with Randy. You're okay? I'm going to let the panelists have about 5 to 7 minutes, a little bit to tell their story to you. And I know in Soma we've been talking about narrative medicine and the power of story, and so that's how I thought we would start today, is to hear from the panelist members about their story of transitioning. We have some questions, and then we'll open it up to questions as well. And of course I have hundreds of them, so I can't wait. So with further ado, Randy. And let's give Randy a
Hi everybody. So I'm Randy Ruge, and this is my wonderful spouse, Shelley. So I had been, I'll say, a cross-dresser through my entire life until I hit the age of ripe old 47 when I couldn't take it anymore and said I was supposed to be a woman in this world. And I embarked on my journey to change genders. Of course, I was married. I had a wonderful job at American Express, still have a wonderful job. I am a senior programmer analyst, and so I've also got 2 children, which Shelley was a step parent to. Now they're grown, they're 27 and 29. So everybody had to do a lot of transitioning around me, and I wasn't sure if I'd come out on top in the end. So, and I'm happy to say that I made it. Everything worked well. Still have my family, still have my job, still have my wife. So I'm just one of the very fortunate transgender people that are able to change and keep everything. So, and this is my wonderful wife, Shelley.
Sure you heard about me.
Well, no, Shelley, you can talk.
You can
Oh, yeah, okay, okay. Actually, what I wanted to do is, Randy, 1 second here. Would you, I'm sorry, I know. Could you explain what a cross-dresser is? I think a lot of times what we have, and hopefully you can hear me in the back, a lot of your questions that I had was explain differences between a drag queen, a cross-dresser. There's lots of wrong, erroneous information out there, or we're just plain we don't know those terms. So as a cross-dresser, what was that?
So as a cross-dresser, it was more along the lines of I still need to touch on the feminine side for whatever reason it was. And so for many, many, many years, I really thought that's all I was. And I thought that's what I would continue throughout the rest of my life till death. But it's amazing when you're starting to get older, you're starting to look at your life. And my one question, you know, that I always said was, if I were to die tomorrow, did I do everything I wanted to do? And my answer was absolutely not. So now if I die tomorrow, I've done everything I wanted to do. I faced fear. I wanted to live this way for the longest time. So I made it.
So maybe then, Shelley, what you could do is help us understand. Did you know that Randy was a cross-dresser then those years? Okay, how was that?
So even when we talk about terminology, like when we say the word cross-dresser, for me, I don't see that as a stagnant thing. When a client comes to me, for example, and labels themselves as cross-dresser, maybe, but maybe along their journey, they're going to find out that they do want to transition. So I never take these terms as a solid, concrete thing. I see gender on a spectrum, and that's the way I work with it as a professional. So being, talking about the label, I really had that label in my mind. When Randy and I first got married, I did not know anything about gender at all in terms of transgender or whatever. Anything I had seen had been not complimentary in the media. So it was really frightening for me as a spouse. And remember also that this is 8, 9 years ago when Randy disclosed to me, but it was 16 years ago that we were married. There was nothing out there about this. So there really wasn't a way for me to educate myself responsibly. The internet did not give me the answers. It just really brought more fear into my life. So it was hard for me to discuss it with Randy. And what happened is we both became very isolated, which is one of the reasons I'm so compelled as a therapist, because I really believe that when we tell our stories and we speak it out loud, and we really work on transition together, where everybody transitions and we give everyone attention in that process, that we can all come through it better in the end. I know I'm very grateful for this now. I've experienced discrimination, which was something I had not really experienced before, which has completely changed my life. So I always say it's a process, it's a process, it's a process. And when I had that term cross-dresser, I was like, well, that's what it is. Randy's a cross-dresser, but this person is still male in my life. So we'll just keep those things separate. So when Randy disclosed to me 8 years into our marriage, I was crushed. I had defined it, I had researched it, I had this concrete idea of this is what it is. And these are the boundaries around that. So at disclosure, when Randy came to me and she said, Shelley, I cannot do this another day. And that's the way she said it to me. And I knew that when she said that, this was a serious thing. And I knew we had to do something about it. But my heart fell on the floor, and I had to start the process all over again. This is a whole new thing now. So I really had to redefine myself through that whole piece, and it took time.
Great, thank you. And I've got some other questions for you a little later,
Okay.
I'm sure. Okay, Milo, this is your 4th year with us?
I think so, yep.
Okay.
You want the usual?
The usual. Welcome back. You don't have your hat on though.
I know, I'm starting, I am getting older. I'm, nearing 30, so, so I keep my hair that I have. I've decided to, get rid of the hat so I can.
Are you also embracing yourself a little more now?
Definitely.
Definitely. I just wanted to let you know that 4 years ago, when I first met Milo, I remember him when he walked into the room and he had the hat on and he was like stealth. He just wanted to sit down and I think it was one of your second or third times that you'd actually spoken in public, actually, as I recall. And you were very shy. But today you seem
Ready to go?
ready to go. So tell your story, Milo.
Awesome. So my name is Milo. I always like to start with, I'll give you a little bit of experience on what it's like to be a transgender youth. I'm 27, 28 now. I forget which one it is. So I transitioned into my 20s, but I was obviously a trans much earlier than that. So I always like to start out with I have a really amazing and beautiful family, and to keep that in mind, right? We all know that we don't always get along with our family. Maybe you're still working on that relationship. So I had the opportunity to grow up in a really beautiful family that was very strong in faith and values. So my work ethic and integrity and things like that, those were all instilled in me as a young person. And I had a really great upbringing. I had a mom and a dad that were really dedicated to our family. I was homeschooled along with my siblings up until about elementary school. So I was pretty isolated from a lot of other people. So wasn't very socially intelligent as far as having friends and things like that. And then I went into a private Christian school. I didn't really have any problems. I knew that in church, the 3 times a week that we went to church, it was expected that I wore my mom's hand-sewn dresses with multiple layers of petticoats and things like that. And you dealt with that, and you stripped it off as soon as you got home. No big deal. We grew up in a really rural area, so my overalls were pretty much always on, and I loved that about my life. So my parents decided for high school, my sister was having some health problems, so we were going to move to Phoenix, Arizona, and that we were going to attend a public high school. How many of you are in the public education system? So it's a little bit different, right? A little bit different than private school, a lot different than homeschooling. So that was a harsh reality for me. I learned what 4-letter words were. The first time someone flipped me off, I smiled. So I was very new to the process. I had no idea what was going on. I was also hearing things for the first time, like being called homo and faggot and things like that on a daily basis. And so I looked up my reference in the back of my Bible, which is a really bad idea, to try to figure out what those kinds of things were. So my experience in freshman year was actually getting bullied, not just by my peers, but as well as my teachers. I had a substitute teacher that refused to acknowledge my presence in class. I had a note to get out of school early. I was really excited, right? I handed the teacher the note. Looks at me, looks at the note, looks at me, looks at the note. He's like, I can't take this. And I was like, why? Jerk. And he was like, well, you're not a girl. And I'm like, what? Because to me there was no other option, right? I wore my shorts and my t-shirt, but I obviously looked like a 12-year-old boy. Like that was just what it was. Most people thought I was a gay guy. So I was being misgendered all the time. So it was a really confusing time for me as far as what was going on. And my parents were really afraid to talk to me about it because they'd never dealt with it before. So at home I wasn't really able to express what was going on because it's really difficult for a parent to take, right? That their kid is experiencing that. They'd never seen or heard of that before. So I was silenced within the school system at home. So I decided to come out to my family at 16, right? I knew that I liked girls, they were hot, and I finally had like my first crush, right? So I'd gone to church camp, students equipped to minister to peers, and as every other kid would in church camp, right? You realize that you're gay and you decide that you're gonna go home and tell your parents. It made total sense to me. So I sat my parents down. I was really excited to talk to them actually, because in my mind, the way that I was raised, you told your family everything. And so for the first time, I had no idea what my parents thought of me. They asked me a lot of questions like, well, how do you know? Have you actually had a relationship with the girl? And what do you say as an adolescent? It's like, well, mom, they're hot. I like them. And they're cute. What else is there to tell you? So my parents actually sent me out of the room at that point, and that was for the first time I didn't know where I stood with my family, which means everything to me. So I was having a hard time as a youth. I finally landed my first girlfriend, and as you all know, right, that first partner that you bring home, your parents love. You take them home for dinner, right, and your parents are like, man, I hope you marry this person. So you all make really healthy choices. So I got landed in corrective therapy. His name was Larry. I always like to say Larry was very report. And Larry would use the term hot and bothered. So he would try to compare his sexual arousal with his wife to how I was attracted to my girlfriend. which was really gross. You know, because at 16, 17, right, back to sex talk doesn't really happen. Like somehow they magically fall in love and this baby just appears from under the sky. There's no sex. There's no sex. You know, so in dealing with that, that was really difficult. And I ended up, the divide between my parents grew quite quickly. I was accused of, you know, being brainwashed, and at one point I was accused of pornography. My parents had brought in a picture that my girlfriend had sent me, and they not only insisted it was porn, right, because the girls were wearing short skirts and there was cleavage photos showing it. Clearly it was porn, but that one of the girls in the picture was my girlfriend, and that they wanted to take legal action. And so for me at 16, 17, I laughed, right, thinking that they couldn't possibly think that this was a really popular band. And when they asked me again, I was just heartbroken. And at that point in my life, I realized that I had lost my family. My voice had been taken away from me. There was absolutely nothing I could do anymore. To my parents, I was gone. I was a different person. And so I started making some really bad choices after that. I started acting out. You know, I was ditching classes all the time. I dropped out of high school halfway through senior year and ended up homeless. You know, I was couch surfing, like I never had to sleep in the park, right? You know, but I bounced around from house to house and was just completely lost in life. And I ended up being misdiagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. I started hallucinating, and I ended up suffering from psychosis for about 2.5 years. And because I couldn't take care of myself, I had to move back in with my family, which was difficult, you know, because I was in that same environment where I really couldn't be myself. But luckily, right, there's always positive sources of support in our communities. And I found a transgender-friendly therapist for the first time. At 18, I heard for the first time it was okay to be yourself. You know, that it was okay to love girls and just be who you are. And it took me a long time to really process and take that inside and make the changes that I needed to. I found a transgender-friendly support group and found some really amazing positive mentors that were also trans that I was really able to learn from. And from there, I just started to grow. You know, I made the decision to transition, to start doing hormone therapy and to live as male. That was just who I was, and I was ready to be myself. And it was weird, right? The more authentic I lived my life, the less psychosis I had. So I think I'm probably, I don't know, like maybe I'm the only person that's made a full recovery from paranoid schizophrenia. You know, but I was later told that that was a psychotic breakdown due to the experiences that I had. After that, my life just soared. I ended up returning to school, serving in AmeriCorps. I'm doing research with Parks and Recreation Management at Arizona State University right now. And that's why I speak, because I know that, you know, when we have sources of support and things like that, we can prevent our youth and really at any age it can happen to where, you know, we have these experiences that happen and we're not able to handle them appropriately. So thanks for being here, guys.
Julie Myers is brand new to our panel this year, so welcome to Julie.
May I get up and walk around?
Yes,
instead?
please do. Please
One,
do.
you people are way too far away. Most of them won't bite. I can't promise anything. To avoid rambling, which I am prone to do, I'm going to read an excerpt from my story. It's an essay called On Becoming a Woman. And rather than give, you know, the details of my life, I'm going to talk about what it's been like internally to go through the process of being born in a male body and becoming a woman. One day not long ago, I received a private Facebook message from a friend, and it said, "I got to see my vagina today. For the very first time, my vagina. I know you know how significant that is, and I only wish the same for you, and soon. It will change your life." My friend sent this from a hospital room in Montreal, where she was recovering from the most significant surgery that anybody like us, her or me, can ever undergo: gender affirmation surgery. We are transgender, which, for those of you who may not know the specific details, is the phenomenon where the gender identity which is programmed into the brain of a fetus does not coincide with the physical sex into which that fetus develops. To make a million long stories short, it is inarguably one of the most painful birth defects imaginable, largely because it's the only one I know of where the person suffering from it has to fight tooth and nail to be believed. And I use the term birth defect cautiously, as some people reject that term. I was born with a condition that is debilitating and anomalous and can be corrected medically and surgically. To me, that's a birth defect. For as long as I can remember, I've been nothing more than the fleshy embodiment of the feeling that what I saw in the mirror was incorrect. I can recall very clearly being in first grade and having my first girlfriend. Her name was Connie, and we would hold hands at recess while we walked, and I think we probably kissed once, and I know we looked cute. However, what neither she nor anyone else realized was that I was only interested in her clothes. When I think of Connie, I think of a short, dark blue polyester dress, black patent leather Mary Janes, a white shawl with pom-poms, but I cannot remember her face, and I cannot remember her voice. And this would be a pattern I played out most of my life, attaching myself to a girl that I thought I wanted to look like. I knew I was a girl, but I didn't know how to become one, how to be one, and there was nobody in my life who could show me how. Thank God for Phil Donahue. It was at around 10 years old that I heard the word transsexual for the first time on his talk show, when he had tennis professional Renee Richards as a guest. She had been born Richard Raskin and had been an ophthalmologist and men's tennis player before finally being able to transition in 1975. After a woman named Christine Jorgensen in the 1950s, Richards was one of the first transgender people to put herself out there and tell her story. And the topic was covered on Donahue with respect, this being long before Jerry Springer. And it had a very profound effect on a 10-year-old boy who learned that morning that it was possible to become a woman. But what did that mean, to become a woman? When I first saw Richards, I was not yet into puberty, and I certainly wasn't mature enough to comprehend either being transgender or transitioning into femalehood. To 10-year-old Jimmy, all it meant was getting a vagina. That and that alone would make me a girl. And unfortunately, that belief that having a vagina was what would make me a woman, imprinted on the mind of a very unknowing 10-year-old, would define how I viewed any possible success at becoming a woman. Equating woman with vagina would form the template of every significant relationship I would ever have with a woman. Envy, jealousy, a total lack of understanding, true empathic understanding. These constituted my feelings about being with a woman as well as being a woman, and it all centered on the vagina. Consequently, every significant or insignificant encounter I would have with a woman, which for me was necessarily experienced as a woman in a male body, was focused on the vagina, getting to it, being inside of it, being totally covetous of it, and ultimately punishing her emotionally for having one. It wasn't just vaginal possession that enraged me, though. My first awareness of the otherness of girls was their clothing, their appearance. That consciousness of the appearance of girls would become the second most powerful concept I had about being a woman. Formed in the mind of a child, it would take years for me to overcome and get to a real understanding of what it meant to really be a woman. But at the time, and well into adulthood, I could only look at women and think of them in the external. It was all about, that bitch, I want those shoes. There was no attempt or a realization that I had to make the attempt to get beneath the surface to her heart and mind, to what it was that gave her her womanness. And it was only after beginning hormone therapy and socially transitioning that I began to evolve. It was as I was able to live as a woman and wear the clothes and project the style that I had always coveted that it became clear to me what I had so completely failed to understand about the experience. Thus, the closer I am to getting a vagina, the more I understand that I don't actually need one to be the woman that I am. As much as the experience of womanhood is defined by having a vagina, learning to understand and cope with and finally embrace menses, being able to gestate and expel a new life through the birth canal, being objectified and used for access to the vagina, being treated simply as a repository, there is more. Ultimately, I believe the experience of being a woman for any woman is defined by confidence and self-love. However much of these she possesses determines the place that she has in the world and in relationships and in her own soul. I've often told my children that we are the sum of only two things: what happens to us and who we are. That is, the traits that we possess and how they color our reactions to the events that happen in our lives. And on top of that, I am convinced that gender, and all that goes along with it, plays a very meaningful part as well. For men, power, dominance, and social status make up the prism through which they've been taught to filter life. But for women, it is the admixture of confidence and self-love that evinces their essence and informs their femininity. Within a few hours of reading the joyous message from my friend about her vagina, I read a posting by a lovely, powerful woman in a Facebook group. And she was addressing the question of how sex is an obsession in our society, but sexuality, experiencing the power of our sex, is very taboo. The discussion questions in this post related to empowerment derived from women doing jobs seen traditionally as sex-related, such as stripping. And she opined that independent women, women with abundant confidence and self-love, find empowerment everywhere, even in performing acts that others might consider demeaning. And she equated to living in hell, having to conform to expectations and beliefs engendered by a society that doesn't want empowered women. Her belief was that we are challenged to push all limits as a path towards self-knowledge. And ultimately, it is doing what we want that matters, and that independence is in harmony with our soul. I have never been able to stop thinking about what that means, to me and to all women, but especially to all transgender women. Being on the outside for 43 years left me with a sense that I was an invader, or at least seen as one, arriving far too late to the state of woman to ever fully understand what it means or to really belong. Some trans people get hung up in that feeling. They get trapped there. Stuck in a gender purgatory, they can never fully transition because that means leaving the safety of their transgender identity behind. For many of us, being on the outside is the only place that we've ever really felt on the inside. And it is precisely there that I wish not to get lost. I wish to understand and embrace who I really am, a woman. And I wish to know all that I can about what that means. I'm beginning to taste a little of that bliss that comes with believing in myself, and most importantly, loving the woman I've been waiting to be. There's nothing but joy in the surprise discovery that I don't need a vagina to feel these feelings. I get it by doing what I want to do, not what I'm supposed to do, and my soul loves it.
Wow, thank you. That was really, when did you, let me just ask you this, is your family very accepting of you? Okay, well, all right. It's tough, wasn't it?
It still is. It still is. I've been rather fortunate in that I have a spouse and children who all chosen to remain a very strong part of my life. My natal family, though, my parents and my brother and sister have not been so felicitous. My parents still speak to me. My father is better at trying to understand. My mother refuses to try and understand. I have an older sister who told me that she could either have a relationship with God or a relationship with me, but she couldn't have both. So she chose the big guy. And my younger brother, devoted, conservative, real arch, everything's in its own little box, told me I was a selfish asshole and never to speak to him again.
Thank you. Thank you. Julian,
Right,
you have
so-
some pictures too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So my name's Julian, and I was born with a female body. And from the moment I remember having an opinion of myself, I felt like a boy. But I was born in '65 and grew up in the 70s, and there was no example of anybody that felt the same way that I did. There were no mentors, there were no people that I could talk to. So fortunately, I have a very loving, liberal family, and I was allowed to express myself the way I wanted to, wear little boys' Levi's, Wranglers, overalls. I have overalls too. I wonder if that's a transgender thing. But, wear boys' clothes. There was one instance where my mom, when I started first grade, she made me wear what's called a scooter skirt, which is now a skirt, I think. So they took a perfectly good pair of shorts, and put a skirt around it. And I had to wear this thing to school, and I'd try and fall and skin my knees and show my mom that this was not a very safe item for me to wear. And you know, she saw my discomfort, and she said, okay, on Fridays you can wear what you want to wear. So I picked a little pair of jeans and a little boy's undershirt. And that was short-lived. My mom saw that I was miserable. So, you know, growing up, I played with the tomboys and the boys in the neighborhood. I played football in the front of the street, and the first instance I remember feeling a little bit of shame about how I felt was I was about 10 years old, and I was playing football in front with the guys, and we played shirts and skins. Y'all know what that is, right? Well, I was a skin, so I didn't have my shirt on, and my mom came down the street, and we all parted, and my mom rolled down the window and said, young lady, you get inside and put a shirt on. And now, she wasn't being mean, she was doing what a mother would do for their daughter. But inside I felt like, you know what, something's wrong with this. Something's wrong with the way that I express myself. And the other thing I did is, my mom and dad were divorced, and my father was a minister, and he sent me a children's Bible. And I was fascinated with this thing. And my mom, who was agnostic, did her best to read that to me and explain what was going on. But one thing that I got from that book was that if I prayed to God, he would answer my prayers. So I thought, well, this is it. And I remember going to bed at night and asking God to send the witch from Bugs Bunny, you know, with the pointy hat and the wand. And she could turn people into frogs or rocks. So I thought, well, he'll send her, and she'll wave her wand, and I'll wake up with a boy's body. And I woke up and looked, and it didn't happen. And I thought, well, you know, he's probably really busy. There's a lot of people in the world, so I'll do it again tomorrow. And this happened over and over. And I feel that that was my first resentment. That I was angry because that book lied. That I was told that if I prayed to him, I'd get what I wanted, and I didn't. So I developed, although I had a good childhood, there was some anger that started inside of me. And I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know who to blame. But I just know that, you know, society was calling me she. I had to go to the girls' room. I had to be called she, and that's not who I was. But again, there was no reference for me to explain how I felt. So, you know, I kind of learned how to adapt. And things got really bad for me when I hit puberty. Things were happening to my body that I didn't have control over. Breasts were coming in. I remember an experience that's supposed to be really joyful for a mother and daughter is bra shopping, and it was a nightmare for me. I remember you know those little circular clothing racks? I hid under there when my mom picked a bra. She was like, do you want the pink one or I'm just pick one. I want to get out of here. I didn't want anyone to see me. When my period started, you know, I remember the girls in school were all gleeful about, oh, I started my period yesterday, and inside I'm like, are you kidding me? This is horrible. And I knew that that was going to happen to me, and there was nothing I can do about it. So, you know, for my growing up years, I think in our society it's okay to be a tomboy. So I had an outlet for my gender expression. I played boys' games. I did, you know, could wear what I wanted to wear. But when I hit puberty, that started being not so cute. So I really kind of pushed this thing about me down further and further. My high school experience was a good one. I had a lot of friends. I was a good athlete. But I was also starting to develop feelings for girls. Now here's another thing that I can't talk about. So I entered college, and I found a group of female-bodied people that also like girls. I was an athlete in school, and so I finally found a group where I could express that part of me. But I knew instinctively, do not tell these girls that you feel like a man, because you'll get kicked out of that group. So I started going to lesbian bars and identifying as a lesbian. Now, back then, things weren't as open as they are now, so in bars, there's a lot of alcohol and drugs, and I started doing a lot of that, and I'm a recovering addict now, so that was kind of the beginning of my drug and alcohol abuse, starting then. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. Usually I talk for about 20 minutes, so in my 30s, I started bodybuilding, and I discovered testosterone, steroids, when I was about 33. And when I started doing that, I'd say that the results were pretty profound. In about a month and a half, I remember walking through a mall, and there were some mirrors on the wall, on the sides of the walls, and I was like, wow, that guy has really, oh my God, that's me. You know, for the first time I looked in a mirror and I loved what I saw. But you know, the women in the bars that I was going to at that time did not think it was so great. I think I looked a little too masculine, and I got a lot of flack from the girls in the bar. That was my community. And I really got the door shut in my face. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they thought. I loved what I saw in the mirror. But this feeling about myself, about feeling male, was so pushed down and had so much shame and embarrassment about it that even with what was going on the outside, I still could not admit to myself what was happening. So my drug and alcohol use escalated throughout the years, and I finally got sober in 2005. And prior to that, I had shut my kidneys down with drug use, and I was in bed for a couple of years, and then for the first time in my life, I watched a documentary, and there were trans men, and I saw people like me, and they weren't crazy, they weren't monsters. So I really related, but it took 3 years for me to come to terms with this. And it was through getting sober that I was able to look at this with a clear mind. So my fears in starting this were that I'd be single for the rest of my life, I'd lose my family, I'd lose my friends, I would definitely lose my community. And for me, none of that happened. The girl I was dating at the time, the first words out of her mouth when I told her this were, well, what do we do next? So we just celebrated 6 years married. In July, we'll be together for 9 years. So that's my story, and I have to say that despite all those fears, nothing came true through that, and this thing that was such a point of shame and embarrassment for me is now the biggest joy of my life. I get to speak on panels, do presentations. I'm part of 2 support groups in the Valley, one being for trans youth. So this has given my life purpose. So thank you.
Lots of seats down here. I don't want you to just stay like that. Dr. Cole, you've heard their stories.
Yes.
Talk to us a little bit about a medical perspective of what do you do? How do you help folks? When do they first come to you, usually?
Sure.
Use your mic.
I'd like to give a quick anecdote if I can.
Oh, please do, but use your mic.
I was a third-year medical student, and I was doing a preceptorship at a community medical clinic. And at the time, that particular sub-clinic within the big community medical clinic catered to the lesbian community, although anybody could come. And so I did that preceptorship, and when I graduated from medical school, they offered me the job to run that LGBT clinic within it. And so I did my residency and did that LGBT clinic at the time. Well, what ended up happening over the time that I was there, and I ran that clinic for 5 years, was that it wasn't serving the lesbian community so much, it ended up serving the trans community. And people would drive 3 hours one way to come see me, and they would drive 3 hours back home, because there wasn't anybody in the community that they could see. And I kept getting the question, you know, why do you like working with the trans community? Because if you hear me speak, you can tell that I have a great passion for working with that community. And it was something beyond the same reason why you're all in this room, that you want to help people. It was beyond that. It was different than my other patients that were on the schedule that day. And I had a really hard time articulating it. I just kept saying, well, I really enjoy it and I get a lot out of it, but it didn't feel like enough. It didn't feel like it actually articulated how I felt and what that experience was. One day I was reading a book, and there was a quote in the book by Norman Spack. And Norman Spack is a pediatric endocrinologist, and he's out of Boston Children's, and he works with trans and gender variant youth. And Dr. Spack said, I feel like I'm a midwife. I'm helping give birth to that person's authentic self. And I said, that's it. That's it. That's what it is. For me too. I'm helping give birth to that person's authentic self. And if only the cis population showed up with that desire and that drive to live that authenticity as I find in the community that I serve. So the question that you had for me was, how do I help support people? Not everybody wants or needs to medically transition, first of all. And Julian is a man regardless of hormones that is in his body. I have had some patients present to me, and they have a condition called PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I've had some individuals present to me, and they disclose that their gender identity is male, and they have not taken any exogenous hormones, and they still have a full beard. Now, not all people with PCOS have a full beard, but the point is, for that particular patient, they actually may not need to take exogenous testosterone in order for them to have the secondary sex characteristics from this standpoint and otherwise to transition. And the thing with medical transition is you're always balancing risk. You know, we talk about full dose and that type of thing, and I'm using air quotes on purpose because not everybody needs to do full dose. I do a lot of lecturing as well, and a lot of presenting to different audiences, and what I usually tell folks is, it's kind of like the book. I can't remember the author, but the book was called Everything I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. And I feel like that's the case with working with patients, that regardless of what a patient is presenting with, to treat folks with respect, to treat them as you would want to be treated. There's particular things that are a little bit different in the context of the visit. For instance, you know, in my setting, patients remain clothed, okay, and until they need to be put into a gown, and then that gown is appropriate for the patient, and only if something needs to be. If I'm looking at their throat, they don't need to be in a gown. Pronouns are key. One way to alienate a patient right away is to mispronoun. So it's really important that on your intake forms, that your receptionist, everything from the get-go. Things happen, you apologize, and move on. If in doubt, ask. Are there more specifics related to it?
That was pretty good right there. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. What I would like to do is, I wanted to ask, Artie? Oh, I don't think we should be in the same room together, you and I. We'd be trouble together, I can already tell. Oops, okay. What I want to hear from you all is how you made the transition, though, in terms of your physical. I know one of the questions we have is, can you have babies? Can you father? So there's some, I think, misconception there about the biology. So obviously, Julian, you were born a female. You had a vagina, right? Ovaries, the whole thing. Have you had surgery? Can you explain a little bit to the audience about the surgeries?
You know, just a little correction. I don't feel that I was born female. I use that for my body. I relate more with being a transsexual because I did not change my gender. I'm changing my sexual characteristics. I got top surgery. I would love to have bottom surgery. Not all of us want that.
Can you explain what top surgery is?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I got a double mastectomy, and it's a restructured chest. Anybody who wants to see it, I'll stay after, and you're welcome to see what that looks like. I don't have a problem with that. So for me, the way that I presented to the world, I was seen as a female for most of my life, but I had breasts. So for me, I could not wait to get these off. So I had top surgery. Bottom surgery would be, for me, they call it a phalloplasty, so creating a phallus. And I won't get into all the ways that they do that, but for me, from my experience, it's extremely important for me to have that. I don't think that it makes me less of a man for not having that. It's almost, to me, feels like a separate issue. I feel that it's been missing my whole life. And no, I won't be able to make babies. It doesn't produce semen. I don't have the plumbing for all of that. But the one I want, I can urinate through it, and I will have sexual erotic feeling with it. And they create testicles as well.
Thank you.
I'd offer to stay after and show you my chest, but that probably wouldn't be appropriate.
Oh, yeah.
I'll do it anyway, but it's not appropriate. For me, the transition, the process of going through the transition, sort of the opposite of what Julian's done, is actually very simple. I started on hormone therapy in August of 2010, before which I looked pretty much like Julian. I started on estrogen, oral estrogen, which was switched a year and a half later to injectable estrogen. And then I take a testosterone blocker and an androgen blocker. And I was told that at 43, I would have to wait at least 2, 3, 4 years to get the maximum amount of changes to my body that I was going to get because I had waited so long and I had been living with testosterone coursing through my system. And within 7 months, I was presented with these. And I had the choice of whether or not I was going to wait, which was my plan, to wait at least a year or so on hormones to socially transition, or if I was going to say the hell with it and do the social change. And I said the hell with it and did the social change because I'd waited this long and I didn't want to wait any longer. The process for me, the vaginoplasty, I'm not going to try and explain technically because you go to a medical school, you can ask somebody smarter. Basically, the inside of the penis is stripped out, a cavity is created, and then the skin and nerve endings and blood vessels are pushed up inside, and they should still work. The testicles are emptied out, and that skin becomes the labia, and when it's done, and done correctly, it is, you know, pretty much showroom quality. And that, the difference between the surgeries, female to male, male to female, basically is price and aesthetics. It is slightly less expensive for me to get the bottom surgery, from what I understand, than it is for female to male surgery to be done. Significantly less expensive. But neither one is covered by most insurance policies in this country. So if you do go into trans medicine and you treat patients who are going to have to go for surgery, the way it stands right now, they will most likely have to save anywhere from $20,000 to $40,000, $50,000 for this surgery, cash up front, down on the table before a doctor even picks up a knife. There are, I think, 11 states where the insurance commissions in those states have told employers and insurance providers, you may not discriminate. But that leaves plenty of other states where it's perfectly allowed. That's changing, it's changing slowly, and
Thank you.
you'll have to deal with that as doctors.
We're gonna, actually, when we get to Randy, we'll talk a little about the medical side. Yes. Milo.
So I started foremost with testosterone for trans men when I was 21 or 22. Socially, it was easy. I'd been being perceived as male, so it wasn't like a huge deal. I decided to have top surgery. I worked 3 jobs for like a year, and it paid about 10 grand to have top surgery, so double mastectomy. And lower surgery. Arizona State University actually does cover. They just started about a year or 2 ago to cover transgender health stuff. So I'm going through the process of a transgender treatment plan. I'm not quite sure still what that entails, but to try to work on having lower surgery. But not every guy gets for lower surgery. Totally depends on the person.
Kelly, did you need to add anything in this?
Well, as a therapist, part of my job is to help transgender people kind of navigate through this experience because it's very complex. It's a complicated situation and it's something that we take time to do. So one of the first things I do is I sit with the client and we create what I call a transition map. What would that look like? And transition for many people, as some other people have already said, means very different things. Now, some people may want to do hormones, which we call HRT. Some people may want to do surgeries. The surgeries can come in different ways. Like some people come to me and they say, my dysphoria is really mainly about the top part of my body. So I really want to focus on top surgery and that goal. For other people, they say, my dysphoria is really focused on the bottom part of my body. So I really want to focus on that. So it's really not this specific sequence that's generalized all the way around. And as a therapist too, one of the things that I think is so important is I'm so limited right now into where I can refer my clients to, where I feel confident in the competence of the person I'm referring to. I think that what I would like to see is that everybody has some kind of experience with transgender care, so that I can refer people and my clients have people to choose from besides 3 or 4 people in the valley. I think that would be a wonderful thing. Same thing with surgery. Clients have very limited choices in surgery, where, you know, if I want something done, I have unlimited choices. I can go anywhere. On the flip side of that, what I'm seeing in the last couple of years is with so much more media about transition, there are now surgeons out there that I've never heard of before, and that makes me really uncomfortable. So another part of my job is when I have a client come to me and say, hey, I've read about this surgeon in Virginia or wherever, I look that person up, and I may even contact that person and get information, because it's really important to me that this journey goes well for this person. I'm very protective.
You should be. We have on the screen just some statistics about talking about being refused care. So when we come back, I just want Randy now to talk about your positive experience with American Express.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't start out so positive. Why don't you talk?
Well, and I just wanted to add too that remember that every time a trans person goes in for anything, whether it be hormones, top surgery, bottom surgery, facial surgery, we have to have letters from the therapist saying we're mentally stable first. And we have been diagnosed with transgender gender identity. Otherwise, we can't get the surgery. And of course, we've always said, well, that's absolutely asinine. Any woman can go in and get breast implants. We can't. It takes, and of course, too, a lot of us, I think, are on very limited budgets. So now we have to put mental health care on top of that, going to see a therapist so many times before we can get that letter that says, yay, we're allowed to get breasts now. So, what part did you want me to focus on?
Well, I wanted you to talk a little bit about when you at work and your transition in the healthcare insurance piece. The insurance piece.
So, Shelley and I actually put together a plan for my transition, and it was a 3-year plan. It wasn't something that was just jumped into. We wanted everything to go as smooth as we could. So my first meeting was human resources, and of course they about had a cow when I said this is what I'm going to do, because they were like, oh, what is this going to cost? So, and I've been with American Express at that time for like 27 years. So very senior person, knew a lot of people, and as far as the way that they worked on insurance and payments and everything else, the only thing that we could find that American Express would cover, which was Cigna at the time, was the GRS surgery, the bottom surgery. So I was very happy about that. But on the other side of the coin, everything else had to come out of my retirement. So we spent about $55,000 outside of insurance. And then American Express, we were very happy to see that they covered the bottom surgery. Of course, when we got all through with the surgeries and everything else, they were willing to pay $400. And my bill for bottom surgery was $35,000. So I said, we're quite a ways off here, and you guys said that you would cover this. Well, who in their right mind would do this surgery for $8,400? Well, and that's where they came in and said, well, that's typically what that surgery costs. So it took a number of months. It took 3 appeals, and finally I think they just said, you know what, we're looking into trouble here. Just pay her the money. So it was covered 100%. Since then, they came back very nice. American Express, I'll have to say, is really leading edge. I mean, they're on top of this. And they came back. I actually got a call one day from New York and said, okay, I know that you faced a lot of challenges. What could we as an employer do to make your journey easier? And I said, well, on top of everything else going on, financial was a big part of it, and the fact you didn't cover anything. So now, anyway, they've put in $75,000 a year that a transgender person can have surgeries, and that would include top surgery, facial surgery, just about anything we do to make the transition a little easier. And it's like, of course, it's not like we've got hundreds of people jumping on board this boat. So, you know, I mean, five or 10 people, maybe they'll have to put out some money and help us out, but yeah, that kind of stuff would really help.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you all, if you've been being so kind, and then I do have a couple of questions. Have you ever experienced, obviously, I know this is, you know, overwhelmed people, discrimination in the doctor's office when you've presented and said hello? And can you tell us a little bit about that experience? And basically, we have an audience here not only of osteopathic and medical students, but we also have some PT students and OT students as well, dental students. So if you could talk about those sort of, maybe if you can think of a terrible time you had, and what that doctor, physician, dentist could have done better.
Well, I guess I would, the one that comes to our minds, because I told Shelley when I got home and it was just incredible, but back when I was just a cross-dresser, my toes were always painted. They were always red. That was very significant to me for one reason or another. I contracted some illness that I was very sick about, and I went to my primary physician without taking off my toenail polish. I said, this is a medical professional. She'll be able to deal with this in an adult way. I swear you'd have thought I had malaria or something. She was just like, and what is this? Yeah, I didn't have time to take off my toenail polish. And it was almost as if she wasn't going to treat me. It was that bad. So.
I just wanted to mention something quickly about the insurance piece too, because a lot of my clients get hurt about that because they've heard that their surgeries may be covered by insurance. So that's one of the parts of my job too, is I go through their insurance policy with them, if that's something they would like me to do, because often that is not the case. It's not just the insurance company covering it, it's whatever policies the corporation has purchased from the insurance company. So I always try to be really clear about that.
Milo, I know you had a couple of experiences of discrimination, didn't you?
Yeah, I had one where there was an eye doctor, and I had gone to them before and after, so I came back a year or so later, obviously being quite male, and the nurse, like, you know, you have to move your head around, you have to make sure you can see through little eyeglass things. They were literally afraid to touch my head, like I was contagious, and the woman talked to me like I was a child, so that was a fun experience. And then they had another one with a primary care physician. I had to get a pap smear, and that sounds really weird. It sounded like a guy that looks like me. But, you know, I had to go get one done, and it had been like forever, and I was like, okay, you know, I'm just gonna suck it up, gonna man up. And, you know, so I found somebody, and they seemed really cool, you know, and I talked to the front desk lady, and I was like, you know, is this gonna be covered? You know, because it was either $50 out of pocket, right, or you billed your insurance. And she's like, no, it's fine. You know, so I go in, and without informing me, they had a new person. I don't know, one of the trainees. So I went in, and she was like, oh, so you want a prostate exam? And I'm like, no, I don't have those. And, you know, and she literally went from like standing next to me at you know, when you're sitting on the table or whatever, to backing up like into the corner of the room. And that was before she did the exam. And then I ended up they charged me for like a breast exam, which I didn't have. So it ended up being like this huge thing, and I had like gender no match letters, not just from the physician, but the blood work and whatever they send all this stuff out to. I don't even understand it. But I was getting all these phone calls that were like, what is wrong with your sex? Like, and I'm like, I don't know. You know, so that was an interesting experience, and I actually had to threaten to sue the physician for, I said it was insurance fraud, clearly going to breasts. You know, so that was one of those experiences where it would have been like over $300, and you know, it was you know, they were miseducated, but because they were miseducated, it was going to cost me quite a bit, and they would not allow me to just pay out of pocket
So Julie, let me ask you this then. When you go into a doctor, you can pass the mic. When you go into a physician's office now, how do you, the little checkbox, it says female, male. What do you do?
Female.
Okay.
That's, and I only have one doctor here in the Valley, and he is pretty much a specialist in LGBT healthcare. So,
That work.
but when I first started transitioning, we lived in Pennsylvania, MOFN, Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere. And I was extremely fortunate because the physician's assistant I saw had trained in Philadelphia, and she had put some time in at a huge LGBT clinic in Philly. If she had not been there, I would have had to drive the 3 hours to Philly to find a doctor. But fortunately, I had been talking to her for a couple of years. This is my diagnosis, it was on my chart. Don't know if I'll ever do anything about it. When it came time that I had to do something about it, we talked for a little bit and she wrote out the scripts.
What was the diagnosis?
Gender dysphoria, that's
So-
what I put it down as.
Okay. So you actually have to get a pejorative diagnosis.
It's I was dysphoric about my gender and
It's still.
body. I don't look at it as pejorative, and I also, as far as having to see a therapist, I understand the idea behind that too. This is major reconstructive surgery, huge social changes you're going to go through, and you're setting yourself up for discrimination and bigotry. If you're not altogether able to handle that emotionally, you probably should wait. So I don't resent having to have that, especially if because there are therapists like Shelley who are out there waiting to help and guide. I'd rather have that person say, yes, absolutely, you're ready.
Before I tell my experience with the one doctor, all the rest of my medical experience has been really good. But intake forms are really important. If you, as a physician, have my first contact with you, the form I fill out has a box for me. I know that you're safe to talk to, because a lot of us won't get pap smears. We won't get exams because we are constantly outing ourselves, and you never know how that person's going to respond.
So what do you want that box to be? What should it say?
Even if you just have transgendered and a box for, I would put transgendered and male. That way I know that if you have a paperwork like that, that you are affirming and that you are okay to talk to. I'm in my 8th, 9th year of transition, so I will tell anyone and I don't care. But it's really hard in the beginning. And some people just remain stealth for the rest of their lives. So we need to know that our medical providers are comfortable and willing to treat us, because it can be traumatic. And I'll tell you my experience. I work in the medical field, and I was working at a hospital, and I started having back problems. I had a prior back surgery, so turned out at the end I needed a disc replacement. I was in a lot of pain, so I went to a doc at the hospital I worked at, a surgeon. And it was all the male bonding at first, like, hey, what sports do you play? What did you do in high school? And I'm like, well, this is kind of cool. And he was very nice and friendly. And there came a time when we were going to prepare for surgery, and I had to disclose this because I didn't want my coworkers looking in the window while I was getting surgery. We're not supposed to do that, but it happens. And so I said, I told him, and I said, are you okay with this? His demeanor completely changed. He just shut down. And we can see in your face how you feel about us. And I said, do you have a problem with that? And he said, no. But he wouldn't talk to me without his clipboard in front of his face. 3 months go by, I still haven't had my surgery. He's having this test run, that test run. And I finally, in the last appointment, I'd wait 3 hours in the waiting room for him. And the last appointment, he said, well, where's your MRI? Or your x-rays? And I said, you didn't ask me to bring them. And he said, well, I can't do this without your x-rays. I mean, he wanted me to leave. It just takes me a while to get things. But I immediately went to my supervisor and said, please find me another surgeon. But yeah, that was awful because I was in pain at the time. It wasn't like I was there for a routine exam. And the next surgeon I went to, I was not going to tell him. So when I got the call from the hospital, from the intake person that says, is there something else we should know? I I thought he was gay, and I shouldn't make assumptions, but I felt like I was comfortable with him. And I said, well, I didn't tell him that I'm transgender. And he said, can I just tell you why that's a bad idea? Because you don't want someone cutting you open, you know, seeing you like that without knowing right before they cut you open. I'm like, oh, that's a good point. So he said, do I have your permission to talk to his nurse? And I said, okay. He was awesome. He was wonderful. He got me on the table that month. So what took this guy 3 months to drag out, he got me on the table in 1 month, and my back is great. So that's my only bad experience.
So Dr. Fuller, how do you make people comfortable in your intake sheets? And how do you instruct your staff or people that you work with in terms of transgender? Like 50% are reported to have to teach their providers about transgender care. How do you go about teaching others about transgender care?
Right, it's a really great point because the reality is I can do everything perfect, but I'm not an island. I have all these different entities that represent me. So, you know, since we're moving to EMR, it's a little bit more challenging because EMR is more checkbox based to be more efficient. You know, when forms are paper forms, I've tended to use gender and then draw a line. Because then somebody can write something in and that's going to be unique for them because I may get 10 different answers and they may be completely different. The other thing too is in terms of coding. So to make it so that it's, you know, there's so many different obstacles here and after a while you learn the obstacles and you learn how to go around them. For instance, CPT codes and ICD-9 codes. So using the V code, V70.0, which is annual exam, is a very accurate code and much less likely to get stopped up in insurance bureaucracy than V72.31, 9 exam. Also, I use 259.9, which is endocrine disorder not otherwise specified. I don't use the gender dysphoria code. The gender dysphoria code comes out of the DSM, and the DSM is not for me to use because I'm not a therapist. I'm using medical codes. Eventually, hopefully, it will all evolve because I agree with Julie, okay? I agree it is a medical condition. And I think it needs to be put into, well, now we're going to ICD-10, but I think it needs to be put there. So there's different things that I can do because the reality is I don't want it to come back on my patients. I don't want them to have to deal with that sort of bureaucracy.
Great, thank you. Julie?
I just want to say, and you know, I don't know how many people are in this room, but you're all on different stages of your journey, and I know how society is. Many of you may have been raised with preconceived notions about what transgender people are, what's wrong with us, you know, whether it's mental or physical. The bottom line is you as medical professionals are there to treat physiological problems, and that's what we're presenting with. And unless you have a moral problem prescribing insulin for a diabetic or Dilantin for an epileptic, it's not your place to have a moral problem with us being who we are.
Thank you. Okay, one of the questions that we had today was recently Jared Leto won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for his portrayal of a trans woman in the movie Dallas Buyers Club. I have heard some controversy surrounding this, specifically relating to the argument that the role should have been played by a transgender person. Do you think non-transgender actors can accurately and honestly portray trans roles, or is this casting choice a form of discrimination? Who would like to answer that?
I don't know if anyone else has an opinion, and I'll pass the mic around. Tom Hanks wasn't an astronaut, and he did really fine in that film.
I think there are a lot of talented trans actors out there that could play these parts beautifully, and so I just wonder, you know, as I look out there, why we aren't, because this is not the first movie where a transgender person has been depicted by a non-trans person. I don't have an opinion whether it's right or wrong or good or bad, but it's just a piece where I just wonder, is there something that we could be doing differently to be more inclusive of trans people, or having trans people play people who are not trans? How about that?
How about that?
Well, I just wanted to add that I did see the movie, and I thought Jared did an excellent job The only problem I had with it is through the entire story, she is called he. That was my only problem with that. I'm like, okay, she's looking great here. She's definitely a woman. So why do you continue to call her he? That was my only problem.
I think Chaz Bono just recently in an interview said how many times she's referred to still as Sonny and Cher's daughter, and she has gone through the entire process. Look, I did it myself. So.
I think.
Go ahead, Slack.
For me, I think just for us, it's about exposure. I'm grateful that they're showing trans lives in the movies, however it's done. I think that if there's a trans actor that can do the role better, then that person should be picked. But I didn't have any, like I said, examples of trans folks in any media or anything. I think Renee Richards was the first I had heard of, and there was a lot of negative connotation attached to her. So I think it's great that we're being seen. And I think the reason that in that movie she was referred to as he is because that was the climate then. That was realistic. You know what I mean? That was, people didn't get us. And I think it's rapidly changing, so.
Well, even myself just now, the reality is we're raised in a world that really, until 5-7 years ago, transgender wasn't even on my radar. And so the things that I've learned from you all, and just even when I was saying transgendered, I think, Julian, you were telling me, no, it's just transgender. So even the language, learning the language is so important. And our panel today, all of them have said they have cards, they have contact information. So if you want to know more information, how to make yourself better educated as a healthcare provider, I hope you'll take this, chance and time. I learn something every single time. So.
And please know, and I always say this, you can ask me any question that you have. Nothing will insult me. I'd rather you go away with some knowledge than leave with a question that you have.
So, in the last 10 minutes, can we ask any, okay, yes.
I have sort of a medically related question. I'm from the College of Dentistry. I'm asking because I'm ignorant. What is the long-term endocrinological problems? Are there any? Have there been any studies done? Because you're taking long-term, but many of you are taking long-term hormone replacement therapy. I'm over 50 years old, and I've been warned, as a woman, there are many medical contraindications for long-term hormone replacement therapy. So I personally worry for you long-term with taking these medications, and maybe endocrinologically, it'll all work out just fine.
It's a great question. To tell you the truth, we all have that question because there isn't a whole lot of data out there, and everyone's so data-driven. I'll tell you this though, there is much greater risk to the individuals on this panel not taking it. The suicide rate, I don't know if you put the statistics up for the suicide rate. There's a much greater risk in that regard. Each of my patients signs a waiver, and I read that waiver word by word with each of my patients. And if they're there, because if they're a minor, if they're there with their parent or parents, I hate doing it. I have to do it for them and for me, and I hate doing it. The reality is I've been doing it for a decade. Not super long in the grand scheme of things, but long enough. That 3-page document that we all read, I rarely, if ever, see anything on there. The reality is what I referenced earlier as we talk about this max dose. Not everybody needs to be up to that max dose, and it's risk-benefit like it is for any medication. So what I'm doing with that patient, and because I've had the experience of helping hundreds of patients medically transition, I feel like I have a good reference point for what works and what doesn't work and what I expect to see. So we don't know. I think what's going to be really interesting is how are the individuals on this panel going to go through andropause and menopause, and that type of thing. And the answer to that depends on all the variety of factors that ever depends on the patient. Okay, it depends on their past medical history, depends on how long they've been on hormones. It actually depends on their family medical history too, to a degree. So for certain things, for instance, like hair growth and that type of thing, somebody who's of certain ethnic descent isn't going to lose that even if their testosterone goes lower than somebody who is of another ethnicity. So we don't know. The reality is there's more inherent risk with not doing the hormones than there is with doing them.
Good question. Anybody else? Darren?
This might be a silly question, but speaking of like terms and stuff like that is we, in the medical field, are going to have to give histories, like get histories from everybody. I noticed that a lot of you guys are talking, a lot of you people were talking about like top bottom surgery. Is that appropriate term to use, or should we use the more medical term? Or what type of terms have you seen that you're like, oh my goodness, why would you say something like that, or whatnot, that we can kind of avoid just for the history's sake, I think.
Try to be as clinical as possible. You can't really go wrong with breast reduction, phalloplasty, things like that. I mean, you're the ones who paid thousands of dollars to learn those words. Use them.
I'd say for like, it depends on the person, like how long the person's been transitioning. Like Julian was saying, it's a little easier to advocate for yourself when you've been transitioning for a long time. Especially when, we're working with support groups and a lot of like young trans men, when we talk about safe spaces, asking someone whether they've had top surgery, whether do you still have your breasts, that's a very different, it might, like, would you agree that, like, it would isolate that person? So just being aware of, so in that case, like, top surgery, especially if it's someone who's younger, I mean, people transition at all ages though, so it's hard to tell how long someone's been transitioning, but somebody who's younger, newer to transitioning, may be more sensitive and not quite know, just like with a teenager, right? You don't quite know how to advocate for yourself. But
I think just to say, what are some surgeries that you've had? Let them say. What are past surgeries?
Dr. Hooker?
Hi, I'm a pediatrician, and in my examinations with my 8-10-year-olds, we do something called the HEADS exam. It's kind of a social history, home education, and some of the questions approved by the Academy for Pediatrics deal with and address, are you dating? Are you dating males, females? Are you curious? But, I'm wondering, because not long ago I had an 8-year-old who I knew was probably not born in the physical body that they should have been. And what questions should we ask of our 8, 9, 10-year-olds? What would you have wanted to have been asked by your pediatrician?
That's a great question. I went to a child psychologist from 8 years old through high school, and he actually told my mom that I don't know what words he used, but that I had gender identity issues. I don't know what words in the 70s they used, but he was a wonderful, kind, gentle man. But I wish he would have asked me, if you could, would you like to be called he? Or what name would you use if you really, there's ways to ask kids things without being really clinical, just like a kid. Like if he would have said, if you could pick any name, what would it be? It would have been Joey. I don't know, I like Joey back then. I used it a couple times. But, would you want me to call you he or she? Which one do you like better? Oh, he. It's real simple, but I think for a kid to understand, you're just asking what they prefer.
But how about if your mom was in the room?
Well, the mom's
No, I
not in the
never
room
would
with
have
this
said that.
exam. The parent isn't in the room with these exams. This is a one-on-one. The only thing that we have to report is if they tell me that they're going to go kill themselves, they're going to walk out of my office and kill themselves, or hurt someone else. That's the only thing I have to report.
Okay.
Now, the reality is, if they're under the age of 18, mom and dad, because they're on their insurance, can actually march up and get a copy of the record. But, as a physician, I haven't broken that confidence. But even like a 12-year-old who I know, I don't want to overstep my bounds with them, but I am their healthcare provider, and there are times I just don't know what to ask.
Do you have any books on the table that are affirming to transgender folks? Like there's books. What's that one? My Princess Boy.
Yeah.
Things where a kid could see, oh my gosh, she's cool. She has these books.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
don't
little
own my own
visual
clinic.
things.
I don't own my own clinic. I work for someone else, and it's not there. But
Things like that, where a kid could see and feel more comfortable opening up to you.
Or in your room, posters on the wall, like that type of thing in your room, because I've been in that situation before too, where it's not my clinic. The other thing to consider is the magic wand question. And if I were to give you a magic wand, what would that look like? And I do magic wand questions with adults too, independent of gender identity, and that type of thing, because that opens it up even broader. So something.
We're going to, what I want to do, I'm going to bring this to a close. If you have questions, though, the panel is still here, but I recognize the time limits today. So I thank you for attending. Please, though, feel free to come down and ask individual questions. I hope you learned.